Entertainment attorney Stephanie Hay here. And I went to South by Southwest 2024, so you didn't have to. And we're going to talk about something that one of the sessions we went to regarding the SAG Low Budget Contracts and some of the tips that I feel like are useful to you. So I wanted to share because we don't gatekeep over here. So let's go. Before we get things started, y'all know I need you to like, share, and subscribe. So first, let's talk about production company signatory versus a picture signatory. So this was very helpful, and this information is very helpful when you're dealing with your low budget SAG contracts, right? So if you have a picture and essentially it falls within one of the low budget contracts, you want to determine if it's worth your production company becoming a signatory to SAG, the entire company, because you plan to only basically do projects where you're working with union talent, versus you saying, well, no, we're going to do it on a per film per project basis, and we fall under one of their low budget agreements, and we're going to identify ourselves as far as which agreement applies, and we're going to go that route. I will say going that route probably is your best bet to just go per picture versus having your entire production company be a SAG signatory. Primarily because if right now, based on the different budgets that you have for your projects, it may not just be worth it to do it, because you may have other projects that are smaller that you may not want to use SAG Talent on. But if your production company becomes a signatory to the union, then of course all of your projects are under that scrutiny. So I would suggest simply using the contracts and identifying it on a per project basis, creating an LLC or what have you for that particular project, and applying for that project as necessary based on the agreement that you select, okay? Now, let's talk about the selection of which SAG agreement you're going to fall under for your independent production. One of the ways that you can identify which contract to use is not just based on the budget of the film, because most of the contracts will have a budget constraint around it that says this particular contract is between X amount of dollars. If you fall within this range, then this is the contract that you should use. Well, besides the monetary amount that you're planning for your budget, and we'll talk about how to play that into in a second, you also want to identify your distribution route. What route do you see this film going? So just because your budget does not match up with your distribution route, you want to balance the two, right? So let's say you plan on doing a theatrical release, but your budget doesn't necessarily meet the contract threshold for when you're able to do a theatrical release with your project. But if theatrical release is a route that you're going, despite the fact that that budget is higher and doesn't require these different metrics, doesn't necessarily mean that's not the contract you should go with. You should probably go with that contract because you don't want to be limited and then have to go back to SAG and say, hey, we actually got theatrical distribution, so now what do we need to do in order to meet now the new criteria from a monetary perspective as that happens. We're not saying you can't go back and do that, but it saves you the headache if you'd already applied for that particular agreement. So determine your distribution route as you're making considerations of which agreement to pick, because it's going to help guide you and saying, okay, we're only going the film route, or the film festival route. So we only need to look at the particular agreements that apply to film festivals, okay? So make that a part of the things that you consider when picking a contract. Now, when you're talking about your budgets, when you're looking at the contracts from just a budget restrictions, right? You want to have within the budget that you set out for your film a cushion of 5 to 10%. The closer you get to the top of that contract budget, the most likely they are to bump you up into the next contract. So if you don't have a cushion of about 5 to 10% and you're on that line of $300,000 to make your project, you might as well go up to the next set of contracts because they're going to bump you up anyway. Okay. So have that cushion set forth in your budget when you submit it and are applying and saying, this is where I want to fall, because without that, they're probably going to bump you up anyway, because things happen and projects go over budget all the time. And so they're looking at it as if that's probably going to happen, which is automatically going to bump you up. So take that into consideration as well when selecting which low budget agreement you believe you're going to fall under, okay? Next, to even apply to fall under one of the contracts, you only need one SAG talent. So if you have one SAG actor that is willing to participate in your project, then of course you can apply to become a signatory, because they of course can't work on any projects that are not under SAG. So in order to get them to work on your project, you need to become a signatory, and you can determine which contract you fall under based on the various contracts that are on the website, and then from there pick that contract, and now you can work with that particular talent. And again, you only need one union member in order to then have your project apply and apply to be a signatory for that particular project. Next, let's talk about bonds and escrow. So the union, of course, requires that you do a bond, and the bond is the money you plan on paying your performers in your project. You have to do a bond in order to be a signatory. There's no way around it. And if you are filming for less than 2 weeks, you have to do a bond that's 100% of how much you plan to pay every every principal performer on your project. Okay, if your project is going to be more than 2 weeks, it's about 40%. So the bond is about 40% for over 2 weeks, and less than 2 weeks, you have to provide 100% of your principal performers' fees to the union, basically to secure that they're going to get paid. Okay. Now, a caveat to having to do that is to do an escrow. If you put that performer's fees in an escrow and there's a contract showing that, then you don't have to provide those fees in the bond, because essentially the talent is guaranteed their money because you all have set it up and put it in an escrow, and that has been negotiated between the production company and the talent and their agent. So you don't have to provide that money if you're putting that money in escrow in favor of the particular performer. Okay. Now, when you're waiting for your bond to come back, it takes a year or more for that bond to return to you once you put it up for your project. So don't count on it no time soon. Like, just because principal photography is over, you've wrapped, you're at distribution, does not mean the money automatically comes back. So do not count on that money a part of your budget moving forward. And don't count on it to say, well, okay, well, if it takes this long, you can just transfer it over to another project that we're doing. It's not going to work like that. They're not going to commingle the funds or the agreements in that way. So with that being said, just know that money is going to take a year or more to come back to you, and it cannot be transferred. So just prepare for that money to sit even once principal photography is over. Okay. Now let's look at some of the incentives. So there are some incentives based on the agreements that you select that you're able to tap into, which helps to increase your budget. So you have a background performer incentive as well as a diversity incentive. Now, the background performer incentive is only applied to the moderate low budget agreements and will help increase your actual budget for your film. So you may want to look at what that looks like if you're falling within that particular contract range when it comes to your budget. So look at the background performer incentive, but you also have a diversity incentive. This protects all federally protected classes, individuals with disabilities, things like that. That will also help increase your budget. Now, when it comes to the diversity incentive, what you cannot do, this is just a tip, what you cannot do is ask specifically, does this person fall within a particular category? You are hoping that their reps will be forthright with that information. If you're courting them to be on your project, that would be helpful. So you can't ask specifically if they fall within any of these protected classes, but you are hoping that they're going to give that information forthright if it's not, of course, obvious, right? And then also, as far as the diversity incentive goes, only one person can qualify for one, let's say, diversity incentive. So the person can't be falling as a woman, Black, with a disability, all three to qualify. It's one incentive per person, guys. So just keep that in mind as you're trying to qualify for the diversity incentive. And then finally, let's talk about residuals. So when it comes to residuals, of course, As a signatory, you are responsible for paying residuals. What you want to do is get your distribution company, whoever you decide to go through distribution with, to sign a distribution assumption agreement. By doing this, it alleviates your responsibility as the production company to pay residuals long term. If you do not get them to sign this agreement, guess who's responsible for paying the residuals for the life of the film? You as a production company. So it is imperative that you get them to sign off on this agreement prior to moving forward with distribution, so it will relieve you as a filmmaker, as a production company, of the responsibility for paying residuals back to the union for the life of the project. Okay, I hope that helps. Talk to y'all later. Bye. If you found this information helpful, hit that like button, share, and subscribe for more.